So I decided to 3D model the Master Sword to get some cool renders for wallpapers and stuff like that, and then decided, hey, I'll just make it 3D printable at life-size scale. So I did a 0.1mm layer height, and here is the printing process on screen. I did all this printing on a Bamboo Labs P1S. So here's all the pieces. I did design them to be support free as well. And if you're interested in making your own, you can get the files on my Etsy shop. A link will be in the description down below. It's pretty easy. It'll come in 3 file packs, one for the sword, one for the scabbard, and then one for a wall mount. So let's get to the assembly. Here are all the pieces. You have the blade part 4, the blade part 3. This is the blade part 2. You're going to need 2 of these. They're the same length. Here's blade part 1. This one's got the iconic Triforce kind of engraved into it. This is the guard, and there are 2 versions of this. One of them has little Triforces around the perimeter, and one does not. This is the grip. This is the pommel nut and the pommel. I had already glued these together when I started filming, but these print in 2 separate pieces. I called these the guard wings. And so these are printed in halves, so you'll need 2 of each. And these are the grip to guard alignment keys. That's just to make sure the grip and the guard are lined up correctly. Other than that, you'll need 3 wooden dowels. So you'll need one 1/2 inch by 36 inch wooden dowel. These are like $1. I got these from Hobby Lobby. And then you'll need 2 of these 3/16 inch by 36 inch wooden dowels. These are all very cheap. You should be able to get these at your local Hobby Lobby or craft store. You'll need to trim the smaller dowels down to about 27.5 inches, roughly 70 centimeters. And then hang on to those trimmings, because we're going to use those trimmings later. Just to make sure that the dowels fit, what I did was I shrunk one of these blade parts down on the Z-axis alone, just to use as a little guide. And you can slide your dowels through just to make sure that they fit. I did have a few areas on my dowels where they were a little snug, because these dowels aren't turned super precisely. And so I had to take a little bit of sandpaper and run it over the tighter fit areas, and everything went smoothly. So the first thing that we're going to do once you get all the pieces printed is just do a test fitment for all the parts, just to make sure everything lines up and fits on your dowels correctly. You can see how the smaller dowels slide into the sides. They're mostly just for alignment, whereas the center 1/2 inch dowel is for structural support and rigidity down the length of the whole blade. Also, I'm just kind of winging these the voiceover here. I just figured that I'd do a voiceover, but I did go ahead and add subtitles just in case you don't want to listen to me. I get it. So instructions are pretty straightforward here. This is just how I assembled it, but you can kind of do your own thing. So you can see here where each blade section meets, that's where, once it's all glued up, you'll have to do a little bit of filling and sanding. And here is the guard. You can see here I modeled these little Triforces around. That's just kind of like a little artistic thing that I did. It would look better on a resin printer, but it came out pretty good on the FDM printer. If you don't want those to be in your model, I have 2 models for the guard included. One of them is just smooth without the Triforces. So yeah, those where each blade piece meets, that's where you'd probably want to do some filling and sanding. But of course, you know, your final result is just going to depend on how much work you put into it. I'm not really doing a whole lot of work on mine. Mine's not really going to be a cosplay or you know, Proplica type model. I just did this for fun. So you can see here how the grip alignment keys will line up the guard. This is so that the lacing on the grip is in the correct orientation when both pieces are mated together. So again, these two pieces for the pommel are printed separately. I went ahead and glued mine together before I even started filming, so just keep that in mind. You can go ahead and do the same. My dowel was a little bit too long, my 1/2-inch dowel in the middle, so I did have to trim that off just a hair, maybe about 1 millimeter or 2, so everything fit flush. But that's just kind of the mock-up. What I did after that, after I made sure everything fit, is I went ahead and sanded all the flat areas where the pieces will be mated together. I did have just a little bit of lifting on the very edges of the blade. I used a textured plate, but it still lifted. I guess it's just because they come to such a sharp point. There you can see it a little bit, just a little bit of lifting. Not a big deal. You can just lay some sandpaper flat on the table, rub it across, do it until you're pleased with it. Again, if you want this to be a really good looking model sword, you're going to end up filling the gaps in between each segment and sanding over it, making it to where you can't even tell that they're separate pieces. So, you know, just put in as much work as you feel like you need to, but I just got it to where I was happy with how they fit. Wasn't going for perfection or anything like that. And definitely remember to wear a mask. You don't want to breathe in any of these plastic pieces. That's for sure. No plastic dust. That is not good for the lungs. So yeah, I sanded there where the guard wings will meet up. There are the guard wings. So I decided to model these and split them the way I did just for rigidity, and so we wouldn't have to use any kind of support. And I think it turned out well, because the seams where they are glued together almost kind of feels like the seams where like a part would be injection molded or something like that. But as you can see, the construction, how I designed it, is for that extra piece of 3/16 inch dowel to connect the guard wings through the middle of the guard, so we are gonna have to drill a hole there in that 1/2 inch dowel, which is no big deal. Just to get a mark where you're gonna need to drill that hole, go ahead and assemble it. Make sure the dowel is pressed in all the way, and then put you a little mark right through that hole in the guard onto that dowel. And do that on both sides, just to make sure that you're going straight through the center of it. You don't want it to be at a weird angle or anything like that. The drill bit that I had was almost the same size as that 3/16 inch dowel. It was a little bit smaller, but it wasn't really a big deal if it's a little smaller. Even if it's a little bit bigger, it's not really a big deal, but I would rather mine be a tighter fit than too loose, just for rigidity and all that. So here with that hole drilled out, you can see it was a snug fit. I didn't show me pushing it through, but it is a pretty good snug fit. So you can kind of get the idea of how the guard wings will be held on with that dowel. So I haven't trimmed this crossguard dowel yet. And I did this before I glued the guards together. I recommend doing that. You can see I'm marking on the one side where I'd need to cut. And it came out to about 5.5 inches, 145 millimeters, something like that. And so there you go. I did trim mine just a little bit short, by the way, which I recommend doing just to make sure everything fits. You want to leave a little bit of room in there for glue as well. Of course, don't apply too much glue. I use E6000, by the way. It is a very strong glue, and it's a little bit flexible as well. And it's able to be sanded and all that. But you can use whatever glue you want, whatever kind of permanent glue is your favorite. I'm sure it'll work fine. I've just been using E6000 for so long on a lot of these 3D printed parts, so that's what I went with. And there you go. You can kind of see how that is held together. And I think that that was a decent design for rigidity, you know, for a plastic sword. But now that all of our prep is done and all of our alignment and all that sanding is done, it's time to go ahead and glue everything together. So I started with the guard. You can kind of start wherever you want, but I just wanted to start where that hole that I drilled is, because I wanted to line everything up from that point outwards. So from that point down the grip, and from that point up towards the tip of the blade. So I also made sure to put a good bit of glue into that hole. You can see the big glob of glue that got pushed out by the dowel. Make sure to wipe off any excess. You don't want to get that all over your nice Master Sword model. But yes, of course, push one of the guard wings on all the way. Make sure that your dowel is perfectly centered. Make sure the small dowel is perfectly centered in that big dowel before the glue dries. And so once that dries, I went ahead and started working on the blade first. Of course, this is where your longer 3/16 inch dowels will be inserted. And again, the smaller dowels, not so much for rigidity. They're pretty flexible, but really just for alignment purposes. Make sure you're pretty generous on the glue. Of course, you can always wipe off any excess once everything is all in place. So here is the first, this is the blade part 1. This is the first blade part that butts up next to the guard. So I didn't slide it on all the way just yet. I left a little bit of room, and I'm just going to apply a decent layer of glue around every dowel. Of course, you can slide it back and forth and make sure it gets everywhere. I had a relatively tight fit on the blade in this section. So as you can see here, I pushed them together. I mated the two surfaces, and there's a little bit of play between the two pieces. So what I did is I have these 3D printed clamps, and I'll leave a description for those in the I'll leave a link to those in the description. But these were really handy. These helped get everything aligned and pretty flush. I imagine for the filling and sanding process after this, these little clamps would help minimize the amount of sanding you have to do to get these seams to disappear. But there you go, that's that. I did have the worst seam in this next section, and that's just because of the orientation that the blade part 1 is printed. It's actually printed upside down compared to the rest of the blade pieces. And so, like I said, I had a little bit of peeling on the corners of most of my blade pieces. So in this connection alone right here, both pieces were... The gap is a little bit bigger because both pieces lifted, and the ends that lifted were mated up against each other. So that's the worst seam on my blade. Of course, I was a little bit lazy. I should have sanded that a little flatter, but it is what it is. Basically, for each blade section, I just repeated the same process. I didn't glue the whole thing at once. I glued one piece at a time, because I only made a couple of these clamps. I guess you could do the whole thing in one go if you had a bunch of these clamps, or you know, have your own clamps, but I just did one section at a time. I let the glue dry, and then I would glue the next piece. So this is the last part of the blade, the tip. I also sanded the tip of the blade. I rounded it over a little bit. You can leave it pointy if you want to, but you know, at the end of the day, it is not a real sword. So I gave it a little bit of a, I sanded it around a little bit, and I like the way it came out. And that is a thick blade, let me tell you. The Master Sword blade is not a thin blade. That is a chonky boy. But at this point, yeah, it was starting to come together. I was excited to get the grip on. So get your keys in there. Make sure those are glued in. Apply a little bit of glue to where the surfaces will mate, as well as along the dowel. You can slide it back and forth. I did not have a way to clamp the guard onto place, so in hindsight, I guess you could have pushed it on all the way and put a clamp on the dowel where the pommel goes, but I just kind of let it dry. It ended up fine though. I didn't have a big gap where they meet, just because of the way that it's sliced. It just kind of ends up looking like there's no seam. And there's the pommel. Make sure that you have the pommel lined up exactly right as well. So the last part here is the guard wings. We're going to have to glue these on. So make sure you apply a generous amount of glue there in the hole where the 3/16 inch dowel goes. And a little bit on the outside too, because this is going to have to be mated to the guard as well. And once you're happy with your glue, go ahead and slide that puppy on there. And I was trying to think of a good way to clamp these, and then I realized rubber bands would be perfect. So what I did is I took 2 small rubber bands and I wrapped them around the guard and the guard wings, and that really helped. I think that was a really good decision. It helped a lot. So go ahead and repeat that process for the other guard wing, and that's it for the sword, at least for the assembly. But that is pretty much it. And this thing is a big sword too. I mean, this thing is it's 41.5 inches, so it's actually longer than my quote unquote replica in the background there. But yeah, it's actually very sturdy. That central 1/2 inch wooden dowel just keeps it very straight. There's no flex to it either. I was able to kind of mess around, play with it, swing it around. I was going to print the scabbard but I ran out of filament. And so I only had enough to print just the very top part of the scabbard. So let me know if you're interested in seeing me print the scabbard, but it's very straightforward, although it does need to be printed with supports. And here is the wall mount. So the files for that are also included. Of course, if you do want the files, remember I have them for sale on my Etsy shop. And yeah, let me know if you want to see more of this sword, or let me know what sword you'd like to see next. Or it doesn't really have to be a sword, but yeah, just let me know. Anyway, thanks for watching.